The Zorvok Empire, a race of cold and calculating aliens, had established a fragile alliance with humanity. The Zorvoks were known across the galaxy for their immense strength and technological superiority. Towering, armored, and emotionless, they were a race that inspired awe and fear in equal measure. Trock, the Zorvok ambassador, embodied everything his species stood for. His towering figure, clad in sleek, metallic armor, stood at the head of the table as he entered the high-level diplomatic meeting on Earth. The humans, eager to forge peace, had invited Trock to their planet for crucial talks. These talks, if successful, could solidify the fragile alliance between their worlds. General Cooper, the leader of the human delegation, was the first to speak, his voice steady and welcoming as he discussed the terms of peace. But despite the calm atmosphere, Trock couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at him. Earth was a strange world, its customs foreign and confusing. He was used to the cold, controlled environment of the Zorvok ships, not the unpredictable warmth of human interactions. The walls of his cold, logical mind were beginning to crack. As the conversation moved forward, General Cooper suddenly paused and turned to Trock with an unexpected request. "Ambassador," he said with a slight smile, "we've arranged a small favor. While we're handling some urgent matters, would you mind watching over a pet for a few hours? It's a simple request." Trock's mind went blank. "Pet?" he repeated, his voice betraying the faintest crack of confusion. "Yes, a pet," General Cooper said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. A small, excited bark interrupted him, and a human woman stepped forward with a tiny creature on a leash. It was a dog, seemingly harmless but full of energy, with a wagging tail and wide, innocent eyes. Trock's heart skipped a beat. A pet? Something so small, so vulnerable, and yet the humans treated it like family. The thought was deeply unsettling. What was he supposed to do with this creature? It was not a Zorvok warship or a combat protocol, it was a living being that needed care, attention, and, to his horror, affection. The dog, sensing Trock's hesitation, bounded toward him, its leash dangling from its collar. It stopped right at his feet, looking up at him with curious eyes. Trock took a step back, unsure of what to do. The other humans chuckled at the scene, but Trock felt himself growing more uncomfortable by the second. His once immovable demeanor was slipping, and he couldn't allow that to happen, not in front of the humans. He had to stay in control. But how could he say no? Refusing the request would be insulting to the humans, jeopardizing the delicate peace they were trying to build. Trock's cold, logical mind struggled to process the situation. He was a Zorvok, a representative of a race that had conquered entire star systems. He had faced down enemies on distant battlefields, negotiated with ruthless warlords, and stood firm in the face of the galaxy's most dangerous beings. But this was something entirely different. With a reluctant sigh, Trock finally agreed, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Very well," he said, his words careful, "I will watch the pet." As the dog trotted happily beside him, Trock tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that his sense of control was beginning to crumble. The dog, oblivious to his discomfort, seemed to sense its own power over the situation. It nudged his leg with its nose, wagging its tail, demanding attention. Trock stood there for a moment, frozen, unable to move or speak. The room, which moments ago had felt like a battleground for political negotiation, now seemed to shrink around him. The other humans didn't seem to notice the tension in the air. They were busy with their own matters, leaving Trock alone with the dog. He glanced around, desperate to find a solution, but it was too late. The situation had spiraled beyond his control. He could hear the dog panting, its eager eyes locked on him. Every move the creature made seemed to grow more frantic, more unpredictable. It nudged his leg again, this time more forcefully, and Trock flinched. The ambassador's sharp mind, accustomed to solving complex problems with cold efficiency, now seemed helpless in the face of this simple creature. How could this small, unpredictable being, so full of life, shake him to his core. He glanced down at the dog, its soft fur and innocent eyes staring up at him, and for the first time, the ambassador felt an emotion he couldn't control, uncertainty. This wasn't what he was prepared for. And in this moment of weakness, the room seemed to close in on him as the dog jumped up, knocking over a glass of water. Trock, now completely out of his element, realized he had no idea what to do next. The delicate peace between the Zorvoks and humans rested on his shoulders, but all he could focus on was the dog's persistent energy and his growing panic. The audience is left on edge, wondering how this simple task will unfold. Will Trock manage to regain control, or will this seemingly innocent creature unravel everything? Trock stood there, stiff and uncomfortable, as the dog continued to circle around him. The small creature seemed to have boundless energy, darting between his legs and barking excitedly at him. Trock's armor, which was designed to withstand the harshest of alien battles, now felt awkward and out of place in this strange scenario. The dog, with its soft fur and mischievous eyes, seemed to find the cold, metallic surfaces of his suit particularly interesting. Before Trock could react, the dog had already begun to chew on one of his gauntlets, tugging at the tough material with its sharp teeth. The ambassador winced, unsure of how to stop it. "No," he said in a firm voice, but the dog didn't listen. Instead, it yelped playfully and continued its attack. Trock tried to shake his hand free, but the pet's teeth were locked on tight. The situation was spiraling out of control. The dog wasn't just chewing on his armor, it was also barking loudly, its barks echoing off the walls of the conference room. The sound was jarring, so unlike the calm, calculated atmosphere that Trock was used to. Each bark seemed to cut into his composure, and his cold, logical mind began to race. Suddenly, the dog lunged toward a nearby table, knocking over a glass of water that had been left there. The water splashed across the table and onto a series of buttons linked to Trock's Zorvok-controlled tech. Sparks flew, and alarms blared through the room. The AI defense system, which had been designed to protect him at all costs, activated itself in a violent frenzy. A force field sprang to life around the room, trapping everyone inside. "Stop!" Trock shouted, panic creeping into his voice for the first time. He rushed to deactivate the system, but in his haste, he accidentally activated a cloaking device, causing the room to flicker in and out of visibility. The dog, oblivious to the chaos it had caused, ran in circles, barking excitedly at the flashing lights. The more Trock tried to control the situation, the worse it became. The ambassador's mind, usually sharp and precise, was overwhelmed by the dog's unpredictability. The situation was now completely out of his control, and the contrast between the cold, calculating Zorvok ambassador and the chaotic, playful dog couldn't have been more obvious. For a brief moment, the entire scene felt almost comical. Trock, usually the one who dictated every situation, was now helpless, reduced to chasing after a small dog and attempting to stop a malfunctioning security system. The contrast between the stoic alien and the mischievous dog provided an almost absurd humor, yet Trock knew the gravity of the situation. The alarms weren't just a nuisance, they were a sign of potential disaster. But just as Trock was about to lose his composure entirely, the dog bolted. With a burst of speed, the pet dashed out of the room, its leash trailing behind it. "No!" Trock shouted, his voice tinged with frustration. He immediately activated his cloaking device again, hoping to track the dog down. But the device malfunctioned once more, and the Zorvok ambassador found himself flickering in and out of visibility, unable to lock onto the dog's position. The pet was faster than Trock had anticipated. It darted through the building, leaving a trail of chaos in its wake. Now, the ambassador had a much bigger problem. The small dog, seemingly harmless, was on the loose, and Trock was charged with keeping it from causing an international incident. With the cloaking device still malfunctioning, and his tech going haywire, Trock realized he was no longer in control. As the dog sprinted through the halls, the ambassador's mind raced. How could something so small and seemingly harmless turn into such a massive headache? The pet had become a symbol of everything that was wrong in this diplomatic mission, a perfect storm of chaos in the middle of an already delicate situation. Trock had no choice but to chase the dog. But in that moment, as he struggled to regain control of his malfunctioning tech, he couldn't help but wonder how much worse this could get. After a chaotic chase through the halls and corridors of the building, Trock finally found himself outside. The dog had led him on a wild run, darting through rooms, knocking things over, and slipping through cracks where Trock's cloaking device couldn't track it. The Zorvok ambassador was exhausted, his usual confidence now completely shattered. His tech was malfunctioning, his emotions were in turmoil, and yet the dog continued to evade him with surprising speed and cunning. But then, just as Trock thought he might lose the dog for good, he spotted it. The small creature was lying on a park bench outside the building, panting heavily after its energetic escape. It seemed to have worn itself out. The park was quiet, the night sky above filled with stars that seemed a world away from the chaos Trock had just experienced. For a brief moment, the world seemed to still. Trock approached cautiously, unsure of what to do. The dog didn't bark or leap at him this time. It simply looked up at him with tired eyes, its little body heaving with each breath. The ambassador stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of the situation. His mind, usually so focused on strategy and control, was now confronted with something completely new, vulnerability. As he observed the dog, Trock felt something stir within him, an unfamiliar feeling that he couldn't quite place. He had spent his life surrounded by warriors, diplomats, and conquerors, but he had never been in the presence of something so raw, so emotionally pure. The dog, despite its earlier mischief, was now just a small, fragile creature in need of rest. It was vulnerable. And for the first time, Trock understood what the humans had been trying to tell him all along: this was not just an animal. This was a member of their family, someone they loved and cared for deeply. Slowly, Trock sat down beside the dog on the bench. The creature shifted slightly, looking up at him with those large, innocent eyes. Trock didn't know what to say. He had never been good with emotions, always taught to suppress them in favor of logic and strength. But something about the quiet moment, sitting there with this small creature, made him reconsider everything he had believed about humanity. The humans, he realized, weren't like the Zorvoks. They weren't driven solely by power or logic. They valued connection, compassion, and love. The way they treated their pets, like family, with care and affection, was something entirely alien to him. For all their technological advancements, the humans had something the Zorvoks didn't, an emotional depth that allowed them to form bonds with even the smallest creatures. Trock reached out tentatively, placing his hand gently on the dog's head. The dog, surprisingly, didn't shy away. Instead, it nuzzled against his palm, its eyes closing in contentment. Trock felt a strange warmth spread through him. It was a fleeting moment, but it was powerful. In that instant, he realized that the dog wasn't just a pet. It was a living being, capable of forming connections, of offering comfort in a way that he had never understood. As Trock sat there, a deep reflection began to form in his mind. The Zorvoks had always prided themselves on their strength and superiority, but in the face of this small, vulnerable creature, Trock began to question those values. Could strength really be the ultimate measure of worth? Or was there something more to life, something that the Zorvoks had overlooked in their pursuit of dominance? The dog, now calm and content, rested its head on Trock's lap. The ambassador's usually impassive face softened, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to care for something. It wasn't about power or control. It was about connection, about understanding the emotional ties that bound beings together, whether they were human or not. Trock had been sent to Earth as a representative of the Zorvok Empire, a symbol of strength and control. But as he sat there, sharing a quiet moment with a small dog, he realized that perhaps humanity's true strength lay not in their power, but in their ability to connect with others, regardless of their species. The chase, the chaos, and the frustration had led him to this moment. And in that moment, Trock felt something he had never expected, a bond, not just with the dog, but with humanity itself. As the dog rested beside him, Trock made a decision. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the Zorvoks could learn something from the humans after all. Just as Trock settled into the quiet moment with the dog, the peaceful park around them suddenly erupted in chaos. It was as if the universe had decided to rip apart the calm he had just begun to enjoy. A loud, shrill sound pierced the night air, like a shriek of metal twisting in agony. The ground trembled beneath Trock's feet as explosions ripped through the park's surrounding area. His instincts kicked in immediately. Something was wrong. Before Trock could react, a group of Zorvok warriors appeared from the shadows. Their armor was darker and more menacing than his own, their faces hidden behind cold, unfeeling helmets. They were a rogue faction of Zorvoks, alien dissenters who opposed the peaceful alliance with humanity. To them, humans were a threat, a weakness that could undermine the strength of the Zorvok Empire. And they had come to stop the alliance at any cost. Trock's hand instinctively went to his side, reaching for his cloaking device. But it was too late. The device malfunctioned again, flickering and sputtering as it failed to conceal his presence. The rogue faction had seen him. His heart raced as the ground rumbled beneath him, and the rogue warriors charged forward with weapons drawn. The peaceful moment with the dog was over. He was once again forced into a battle for survival. In the chaos, the dog was the first to react. It growled low in its throat, its body tense and alert. The small creature had no weapon, no armor, but its instincts were sharp. It bolted toward the attackers with surprising speed, barking fiercely. Trock stared, momentarily stunned by the dog's behavior. Was it really charging into danger? But then, he realized, the dog wasn't just barking, it was warning him. The dog's primal instincts were alerting him to the attackers, guiding him toward the danger before he could even see it. In that moment, Trock understood that the dog's loyalty and sense of protection were not unlike his own. The small creature was not just a pet, it was a partner, a companion in battle. Trock swiftly drew his energy sword, its blade humming with a deadly glow. The rogue Zorvoks charged toward him, their own weapons raised. But Trock was ready. He moved with the precision of a trained warrior, his energy sword slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. He parried one blow, then another, before taking down an attacker with a swift strike. Meanwhile, the dog was not content to sit back. With surprising agility, the pet leaped toward one of the rogue Zorvoks, knocking him off balance. The dog's sharp teeth found purchase on the attacker's leg armor, causing him to stumble. The sight was almost comical, but Trock could see how important the dog's actions were. It was a perfect team. Trock fought with his advanced weaponry, while the dog used its speed and unpredictability to disable the attackers. The battle raged on, explosions rocking the ground around them, sending debris flying in every direction. The night sky above was lit up by flashes of energy beams and the occasional burst of fire from the rogue faction's weapons. Trock moved with lightning speed, cutting down enemies left and right, his energy sword flashing like a streak of light in the dark chaos. The dog darted in and out of the fray, tackling enemies to the ground, its barks cutting through the noise of the battle. It was a battle of pure chaos, but in the midst of it all, Trock and the dog fought with a singular purpose. There was no time for hesitation, no room for error. They were outnumbered, but their bond, however unlikely, made them stronger. Trock could feel it now, the dog was not just a pet. It was part of his team. Together, they were more than a mere alien and animal, they were an unstoppable force. As the last of the rogue Zorvoks fell to the ground, the park finally fell silent. The explosions stopped. The alarms faded into the distance. Trock stood, breathing heavily, his energy sword still crackling with power. Around him, the remnants of the battle lay scattered across the park, broken armor, scorched earth, and unconscious bodies of the attackers. The dog stood beside him, panting, its fur matted with dirt and sweat, but its eyes were sharp, full of pride. Trock looked down at it, his heart beating with an emotion he hadn't expected, gratitude. "You're more than just a pet," Trock muttered, almost to himself. "You're a warrior." As the sun began to rise, casting its first light over the horizon, Trock and the dog walked out into the open, side by side. The world felt different now. He felt different. In the distance, Earth's cities stood tall, their lights twinkling like stars in the night sky. And for the first time, Trock felt a sense of connection to the planet, and to its people. The final scene found Trock sitting on the balcony of the building, looking out at the stars. The dog, content and calm, rested at his side, its head resting on his knee. They sat in silence, watching the stars together, the night peaceful after the chaos they had survived. Trock thought back to the beginning of his mission, how he had been so fearful of human pets, unable to understand their importance. But now, after everything that had happened, he realized that humans had something special. They had strength, yes, but it was a strength born not of weapons or technology, but of love and trust. They cared for even the smallest of creatures, forming bonds that transcended species. Trock smiled, his heart lighter than it had ever been before. He had come to Earth as an ambassador of the Zorvok Empire, intent on preserving the status quo and maintaining dominance. But what he had found here was something far more powerful, the deep, unwavering connection between humans and their companions, and the realization that sometimes, true strength came from the smallest and most unexpected places. As the dog lay by his side, Trock's thoughts turned to his departure. Soon, he would be leaving Earth, returning to the Zorvok Empire. But this time, he wouldn't be leaving with just a report to deliver. He would be carrying with him a new understanding, a deeper bond with the humans and, in a way, their pets. The final shot showed Trock walking away from the human base, the dog happily following at his side. The stars above twinkled brightly, and though his mission was over, Trock knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. He had learned that even in the smallest of things, humanity possessed a strength that even the Zorvoks could not deny. And with that, Trock left Earth, not as an outsider, but as someone who had finally understood the true meaning of connection.